Hello, Conf42. It's a huge pleasure to be here to talk to you. So, before we start, I would like to invite you to think about something. I would like to invite you to think on why do we test? And it can be because it brings you the reliability that you like. It can be because you want to make sure that your code is doing exactly what the project manager and what the product expects it to do. It can be because your boss told you that you have to. You might not even be testing. So I would like to invite you to reflect on this during this talk because hopefully by the end you'll have a visibility of what's been happening in the past few years, where are we going, and maybe this answer might change. So I'd like you to think as well on if has any of these issues ever happened to you. If you ever had to deal with flaky tests, with complex tests, with issues with mocking, issues with tests that are hard to maintain, having testing tools that are hard, slow tests, having too much boilerplate, lack of TypeScript support, lack of VSM support. These are all things that we have struggled with historically when dealing with testing. And this leads us to our pain points. So when I decided to start doing this talk, I decided to look at the state of JS survey, which actually is already open right now for the next year. So please go ahead and if you have time, fill it. It's very helpful for people like me who are doing content for you, but it's also pretty helpful for open source maintainers. It's open for the grateful for the community and anyone who has to make decisions around the JavaScript world. So if you have some time, please fill out that survey. So back to the talk. I started thinking, okay, where is our pain? Because I had all these points in the previous slide that are things that I've struggled with. So I looked into the state of JS survey and it told us that, okay, mocking is the number one pain. Then we went into configuration, performance, jest, ESM and CommonJS, excessive complexity, flakiness. That point 8, which is shows empty, is browser testing issues. End-to-end testing, lack of documentation, TypeScript support, unit testing, debugging. And it seems like the testing world is we're going on with a lot of pain. But how happy are we with what we have? Where does this leave us? It's a 2.5 out of 4, which is not, whoa, I love testing. It's, yeah, okay, let's write another test. So, with these pain points and with this data, I decided it was time that I did the 2025 state of JavaScript testing. So that's where this talk is going. But before, let me just introduce myself. My name is Afonso, and I'm a developer advocate at PagerDuty. I'm part of the Solid.js TX team. I'm an instructor at Egg.io, and I'm the author of a book called State Management with React Query. You can find me pretty much anywhere online at DanielJC or on PagerDuty Commons. Aside from this, I maintain a newsletter called This Month in Solid, where pretty much every month or so I go over what's happened in the past month in the Solid land so that people can be updated to it. So if you scan the QR code that we have here on the right, basically it will take you through all of my links. When I started this talk, aside from the pain points, I was thinking a bit on how are companies testing. And I have this data that tell me that 62% of the companies are using Jest, Storybook, VTest, Playwright, Cypress, Testing Library, Mocha, Puppeteer, Selenium, Mock Service Worker, Node Test Runner, WebDriver IO, Test Cafe, and 13% are not even testing at all, as it seems. But this gave me information about the tools. It didn't give information on how the tools are being used. So I DM'd a couple of friends of mine and I tried to get some data out of them. And the question that I asked them is, hey, could you tell me how are you writing tests in your company? And 8 of my friends got back to me. So let's review these cases, shall we? For the case 1, they're writing BDD tests with Playwright, so behavior-driven development. They're using Cucumber and Gherkin to write these tests. They're using Jest and React Testing Library for unit and integration. And they're using Storybook as a component catalog. For the case 2, they're using Jest and React Testing Library for unit and integration, and Cypress to end-to-end. Case 3, they're using Karma and Jasmine for integration / component testing, and Jest and React Testing Library for unit, Playwright for visual regression, Playwright for end-to-end, and Storybook as a component catalog. For the case 4, they're using Jest and Enzyme for integration, and WebDriver IO plus Cucumber for end-to-end. Okay, we start seeing some patterns here, mainly around the unit and integration. Let's see what the next cases bring. For the case 5, They're using Jest and React as a library for unit integration, Playwright for end-to-end, and this is the first person that mentioned mock service worker. So for those of you who are not familiar with mock service worker, or MSW for short, it's basically an API mocking tool that allows you to define your API schemas and ways and handlers that will respond to whenever a request is sent to this request handler, basically. So it intercepts a request and returns you mock data. For the case 6, they're using Jest and React as a library for unit integration. And case 7 was the one that I think that surprised me the most. I don't know if it's because it's a more recent company, but first, this is the first person that actually considers static analysis as part of their testing tool kit. So if you're looking at the testing trophy, static analysis sits at the bottom, and this person remembered of that, and I was very happy around that. So they're using TypeScript and ESLint, and this is also the first person that mentioned vtest instead of Jest. And they're using vtest and React testing library for unit/integration, right for end-to-end. For the final case, Cypress for end-to-end, and Enzyme/React testing library for unit integration. And the way that this company is working is the whole tests are all written in Enzyme, the new tests are written in a React testing library, and if for some reason you need to touch a whole test, you migrate it for the React testing library. And that's a way that they can ensure that the migration happens successfully and without any hiccups. And they're also using mock service worker, which, once again, made me very happy. So, this is the testing trophy I was telling you about, where we have static analysis at the bottom. We go to the unit one, unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end. And I think we should go over each one of these points when we are considering what's the state of 2025 testing in the JavaScript land. So let's start with the static analysis part. So I think to the surprise of no one, TypeScript and ESLint are winning, and I don't see them going anywhere. Especially now with TypeScript being rewritten in Go, it's becoming faster, more performant. It's the de facto in the industry, and personally, I won't want to change, and I don't see a lot of people wanting to do that. However, I would recommend that you keep an eye out for tools like Biome and OXLint, which are actually being used already by some projects, and in some scenarios, specifically like when talking about OXLint, it says that it outperforms the rest in 15 to 20% in short to medium sized projects. So that seems a good thing to look into, or at least keep in your radar. So now let's talk about the unit and integration testing. And I think for us to talk about unit, we need to talk about integration, because they have been deeply tied into the JS land for the last 10 years or so, let's say it that way. And I think it's good that we go with an history lesson. 10 years ago, we were writing tests using this thing called Karma and Jasmine. And these tests were what we used to call component testing. And the reason why they call it component testing was because we were running these tests in a browser environment. But we had some issues with this. First one was these tests tended to be flaky, they were slow, we had issues running them in CI/CD, so using them in a pipeline was painful and it was unreliable. So we needed to have a transition. We needed something better. I don't know if we transitioned for something better, but we transitioned to something that worked. Because then we moved out of component testing and into Jest, which is a Jest DOM-based testing tool. And basically what now we are doing is, instead of running our tests into a browser, we're running them in Node. So what the Jest DOM does, it polyfills some browser APIs, the most browser APIs, so that basically your tests can run in a Node-based environment without you having to worry about what we had before. And this meant that these tests were faster, they were not as flaky, and they could run in CI/CD because it was all based in Node. And this was where we were until 2018. And in 2018, the testing library came out. And with the testing library came its main philosophy. The more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. And this meant that now we were writing our tests from a user-centric approach. There were no longer implementation details focus on our tests. Now we were writing our tests as if we were the user. But this caused a bit on what I like to call the backend fallacy and the categorization pain. What I mean with the backend fallacy is, when I learned my tests and I learned how to test, I was a backend developer and I learned it from a backend developer perspective, which meant, okay, when we're testing a unit, we're making sure that we're going to that unit implementation details. When we're testing an integration, we're testing integration between several units. But now that implementation details bit didn't exist anymore. And then we led into where we are with the categorization pane, because for some people, what a unit is not what a unit is for others. And this led to different companies and different organizations having different definitions of what testing is for them. I've worked in a couple of companies in the past 6-7 years. I've met a lot of people that work in different companies in the past few years, and I can assure you that most of them have different testing definitions. So we are in this categorization pane, which, for the good or for the bad, it helped us in a sense, because now we migrated to using the testing library, and we can say that's when testing started to become fun for a lot of people, and made it even better. So what's our next transition then? It's all about test runners and bundler integration. I don't know about you, but if you ever had to configure JS to run with Webpack, you know it's a configuration hell. It's painful. I spent hours and hours going over that Webpack file, and I gotta be honest, JS is stuck in time. What I mean by being stuck in time, TypeScript support is experimental. ESM support is experimental, and we're in 2025. We have things like Storybook 10 that is going ESM only already, and they're reporting that they have 50% decrease in package size. And in the meantime, we have tools like Jest where the ESM support is still experimental. And that's like mind-opening or mind-blowing in a sense. But it's not just that. We need a test runner that is aware of its environment and it works together with a bundler. So in a sense, we want to build our tests in the same way that we are building our application, which is something that we were not doing until this time. So that's when vtest showed up, and Vite. So basically, vtest and was working together with Vite, and basically, we're using the same tool that we're using to bundle and run our code to run our tests. And we even did another transition, so instead of using just pure JS DOM, we're using this thing called AppyDOM, which for performance reasons got rid of certain APIs, and it's basically a faster version of JS DOM. But when we're talking about JS DOM, then it takes us to the beginning of this year. And that when we started talking finally talking about the JS DOM issue. Artem, the creator of a mock service worker, wrote this amazing blog post called Why I Won't Use JS DOM. For today's attention span, I know it might be a bit too long, it's 10 minutes, but I made sure to make it shorter so that everyone can grasp the fundamentals and why we have issues with the JS DOM. So the first part is, JS DOM runs in Node and Polyfill's browser APIs, so you don't have an actual browser. It's executing browser-like code without having one. Artem has this quote there that I read, which says, JS DOM runs in Node.js, pretends to be a browser, but ends up being neither. So, what's the suggestion here? What should we do? Artem closes up or has this around halfway to the end of the blog post that says, the closer your test environment resembles the actual environment where your code runs, the more value your test will bring you. And if you're familiar with the testing library, you might be familiar with this quote because it sounds a lot like the same thing. So what is Artem telling us? He's telling us it's about time that we go back to the browser. And he's recommending that we use vtest browser mode. So what vtest browser mode does, it's basically what I just tell you. It allows you to run your tests in a browser environment. You don't have to run them in Node again. You're going back to the browser because our technology finally allows us to do this. And I know you might be thinking, oh, it's going to take a lot of refactoring to do that. Not really. All you have to do is basically swapping out two imports, because now we migrated from the testing library into actually the vtest browser / framework of choice, and making sure that our tests now are synchronous. And while I was doing this migration as well myself, I noticed 5 points that I wanted to add here. These are from a React developer's perspective, but here's what I noticed. The first one, I got rid of everything that was query by and find by, because everything now is a get by query. Second point, got rid of all the wait for from React testing library, because now vtest browser mode will have automatic retries out of the box, which is super powerful. You don't have to wrap it with anything. All you have to do is say await, and it will retry until timeout time. Change mock service worker to run into worker mode. So instead of intercepting stuff in node-based environment, we'll use the service worker that it runs in browser to actually intercept requests and return us mock data. Point 4, turn all tests asynchronous, and point 5, get rid of unnecessary mocks, because now we have access to the proper browser API. So this meant I got rid of stuff like mocks on the local storage, because I can actually use the proper local storage now. I don't have to mock stuff that I didn't have access to before. And that made me really happy. I love deleting code, and this migration was super, super smooth. I know you're thinking now what about time? How slow these tests are? It was not that a significant increase. It was like 2 to 3 seconds. And to be honest, I'm okay with 2 to 3 seconds slower tests if they're actually running in the environment where the code is running. It gives me confidence that it's going to work. So when I was preparing this talk and I was doing it for the first time, I thought, oh, I wish I could, aside from this post from Martin and this thing that I'm doing here, I had something that would help me convince you to use the testing library, VTest browser mode, and migrating to these things. And the author of the testing library itself wrote this post exactly on that same day, which made me very happy. And here he says, never been so happy to see people uninstalling the testing library. Honestly, it's incredibly validating that the testing library has been so successful that it's been adopted and rewritten natively by Playwright and VTest. My work here is done. So that's our next transition. Our next transition, and where I think and hope that people will move into the next 2 to 3 years, is basically just VTest. The testing library is there as a representation, because the fundamentals of it are still going to be important and we're still going to have to use them, but basically all we have and all you're going to need is VTest and Vit. And I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah, the future is in component testing. Let's go back to the browser and let's see where this is going. I feel like in the web land, and especially in the JavaScript land, we're finding ways of constantly picking up old concepts and stuff that was not working in the past and bringing them back. And I'm happy with it because the technology now allows us to do this. I have an example when we're talking about frameworks itself. Until 2020, 2021, everyone was so happy having single page applications, but then someone started asking the question, our bundles seem to be a bit packed. The stuff that we're shipping to the browser seems packed. Is there a way that we can start doing server-side rendering again? And that's what we did, because the technology then allowed us to do server-side rendering in a better way that we were doing back in the old times before going away on single-page applications. So the same thing happened with server components, the same thing is happening with component testing. We are back, and I hope to see how this is growing. So the next point, we're talking about end-to-end testing. And I think to the surprise of no one, Playwright has been winning the adoption. And it's not just because it's cross-browser, cross-platform, cross-language. It has stuff like code gen and tracing out of the box, and has things like parallelism, which was paid in Cypress until a couple of versions ago. I'm not sure if it still is, out of the box for free. And it's not just that. The community work that Playwright has been doing 100% shows why they're winning this adoption. And if you're picking something up, I would go with Playwright. But one thing that I was noticed when I was doing the research for this talk is that end-to-end solutions are becoming more than just end-to-end testing, because all of them have versions of visual testing, all of them have versions of component testing, even though it's on Playwright, currently experimental. All of them have versions of API testing, and all of them have versions of accessibility testing. And it's not just them. Things like tools like Storybook that many of us considered just for our design systems also allow you to run all of these tests. So it's very interesting to see how these solutions are trying to cover the market for all these other type of tests and what is going to survive on the non-tool solution part. So are we going to migrate even our component tests into this and only write unit tests on the other side? I'm very curious to see what's going to happen there, because one thing I noticed during the server components storyline of all of this is that many people didn't know how to write integration tests for them, and then basically they just ended up doing end-to-end for everything. So I'm curious. But I'm optimistic that this is going to be the new testing trophy. This is going to be where we are shifting. So static analysis on the bottom, unit test a bit above it, and then we have component and end-to-end testing. And going over all of these, we have visual and accessibility testing. So I'm excited to see where we're going to end up, and this kind of covers the static analysis, unit/integration, and end-to-end section of testing. Now, one of the biggest pains that people talked about was mocking, and I want to talk about mock service worker a bit more, because to be honest, it has become the industry standard, and I'm very happy for it. If you want to get a bit more information about MSW, its documentation is pretty great. If you want to know why I love mock service worker, you can search on YouTube. I have this talk called All You Need Is a Contract, which basically gives you a 30 to 40 minute explanation on why I love MSW. But in a short sense, it supports REST, GraphQL, and WebSockets. It works for the browser, for Node, and for React Native. And the community of it's been working a lot. So it has things like MSW AutoMock, which basically is a CLI tool that generates random mock data from OpenAPI definitions for MSW. You have Playwright MSW, which is a package that provides a better developer experience when you're mocking APIs using Playwright. And it's working on something called cross-process interception, which basically allows developers to control network requests across different process boundaries. And this is useful when we're talking about stuff like server and client side. So it allows you to mock data on the server and allows you to mock data on the client. It's very exciting, and I wouldn't pick any other solution when we're talking about network mocking. And it just makes it so easy. So yeah, that's my suggestion when we're talking about mocking. Now, we're in 2025, so obviously we need to talk about AI. And when we're talking about AI, obviously the first part we talk about is Copilots and Claude and all of our pair programming buddies. There you have two thoughts here. The first one is they'll obviously speed you up, but you need to make sure that you check its sources, especially when you're playing around with things that haven't been around for a long time, like component testing or VTest browser mode and all those things. Make sure that the test that it's writing, it's actually giving you the things that you need. Because this leads to the second point, which is we shouldn't use AI to delegate our thought process and our knowledge gap, because then we're going to end up with a knowledge gap. If we have AI generating everything for us, next time we're going to have to refactor these things, we won't have the knowledge. We'll just be delegated everything. So don't use AI as an excuse to not learn your stuff. Make sure that you actually learn them, and then you work together with AI to speed you up. Next, MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's everywhere. Everyone is going all in on MCP. You have stuff like Playwright, which is pretty good. You can just tell them, hey, open this website, navigate around it, do certain actions, and then leverage the tools that you used to do these things to generate me a Playwright test. And it will do you that. And it's insanely good. And it's not just Playwright that build an MCP server. Meet Scene.js, which is a testing tool created by ByteDance, which we'll talk in a bit, as an MCP server. ESLint as an MCP server. So everyone has been going on MCP, and the hype seems to be getting better and better. So let's see how it keeps progressing. But now you have these tools at your hands reach to use and leverage. So one question that a lot of people ask me when we start talking about AI in testing is, how far are we from self-healing tests? There was this blog post last year on the Ministry of Testing that was pretty good, and had this example of how this company was already using some AI models and some stuff to have a level of self-healing. This was in 2024, now we're in 2025, so I believe that this model might be a bit outdated, because now we have things like Auto Playwright, SciPrompt, and Meet Scene that allow you to basically just use natural language to write your tests. And because we're using natural language to write our tests, obviously these tests are going to be a bit slow, because you still have to go to the LLM or the VLM and do the thing that you have to do. But if for some reason the logout button changes positions, this test is still gonna pass. It will recover, because it will figure out, okay, On the previous version, the logout button was here, but on this new version, the logout button is here. It's still there. So your test will find a way to recover and still pass. So this is the closest thing that we have to self-healing. It's not fully self-healing because you're still depending on the LLM or the VLM to do these things, but it's close. I'm not sure when we're going to reach it. I'll leave that to future Daniel to present in a state of testing in 2027 or 2026, 2028, we'll see. But I'm very interested to see how this grows. And I was talking about LLMs and VLMs because there's a difference when you're using each one of these models with your testing suite. So when we integrate, Mitsyn allows you to integrate with GPT-4o, Gemini, UiTars, and UiTars is basically a point where the model can make a difference. Because if you're not familiar, UiTars, ByteDance is an open source multimodal agent that's built upon a vision language model. So it's a VLM that integrates advanced reasoning and enabled by reinforcement learning. So when using UiTars, you can use target-driven style prompts like login with username foo and password bar. Whilst using stuff like GPT, you have to be more descriptive. So it allows you to basically, in one prompt, say what it needs to do. And what the VLM will do is take a screenshot of the page and then reason. You can see a thinking reason in the background until it figures out, okay, for logging in, I need to find a username. I need to find a password, and then I need to find a login button, and it will do that. Whilst when using GPT, you have to be more descriptive because basically what it does, it doesn't take a screenshot of the page, it gets you your representation of the DOM, how it looks, and passes it via the LLM because it's all text-based. One thing that we noted, though, is that GPT is better at generating assertions compared to a visual language model. But visual language model like UiTars, these things are pretty good. They play Doom better than I do. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. So yeah, we started this talk looking at the tools that we had and me asking a couple of friends how they were being used in their organization. And hopefully by now, you'll have a different overview of how they're being used and why we are using it. And I hope that your discussion on why do we test and your prompt at the beginning might change a bit during this talk. If not, let me recap everything that we went to, and hopefully by the end I'll be able to convince you. So the first point that I would like to make is that everyone will keep doing their own things and having different ways to test. That's the truth. It's like opinions. Everyone has their own. And the same thing happens with tests. Everyone will like to write tests the way that they do. However, tools like TypeScript and ESLint are the best way to do static analysis. VTest has brought a shift in test runners we were long expecting. Component testing is back, and it's shifting us back to the browser. MSW is a de facto solution for network mocking, and end-to-end solutions are pushing into a testing tool suite by giving you things like API, accessibility, visual, component, and end-to-end testing. When we're talking about AI, it won't fix your knowledge gap, but it will make you more productive, and AI testing might lead to self-healing, but at the cost of speed. And finally, we should stop considering tests second-class citizens, because they are as important as your code that you write. Heck, they're even more important because they are the things that tell you that the business logic that you wrote is actually doing what you expect it to do. It's the things that when stakeholders come up to you and tell you, prove me that this is working, it's the point where you can point at. It's the things that's going to help you make sure that there's not going to be incidents, that your stuff is going to break in the middle of the night. So the next time that you're thinking, oh, I hate testing, I don't have time to do this, think about this. Because they are the ones that actually give you the confidence and allow you to sleep better at night. So yeah, everyone, with that, thank you so much for having me. This was a huge pleasure to be here. And yeah, if you want to connect with me, you can scan this QR code or find me pretty much anywhere at Daniel JC Afonso. This was the 2025 State of JavaScript Testing. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you around. Bye.